Hello and welcome to Red Red. Today I want to talk about The Way by Swans, which is the first book in Proust's magnum opus In Search of Lost Time. Quick shout out to Maria over at Strange Lucidity for her video convincing us to read Proust. I'm happy to say that that video worked and I definitely bumped Proust up in my priority list. I'd had this book sitting on my shelf for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, and I just kept not feeling like it was exactly the right time to read it, maybe because of the reputation that I knew about, that I knew it had. I kind of felt like I wasn't ready for it, but I was finally just like, screw it. I'm either going to spend this period of my life having read Proust or having not read Proust. So I'm finally glad that I took the plunge and I read just his first volume, and this might come as a surprise considering the sort of books that I say are my favorite and the sort of authors that I say are my favorite, but I don't think I've ever read a better author, actually. I think that Proust is technically, in terms of technique, not as part of a technicality, I think that in terms of being a master at their craft, Proust is the best writer I've ever read. Maybe the only other person in terms of technique who is that good is Joyce. But, I still stand by the fact that a lot of my favorite writers are Beckett, Barthelme, Lispector, and so on. And a lot of my favorite books are still The Recognitions and Pale Fire. But, yeah, in terms of just the best, when I think of just pull this sentence out and use this to teach people how to write, I can't think of any better author so far that I have read who is as good as Proust. In the videos where I was talking about Samuel Beckett's trilogy, Beckett, by his own admission, famously said that his books were about nothing, and those books are definitely about nothing. I feel like in some sense, this book is also sort of about nothing, in the sense that there's not a whole lot of plot progression and not a lot happens. There's even a great Monty Python skit about it, which I recommend. It's like a game show where they're trying to summarize Proust within 10 seconds. But if I was going to have a crack at that, just summarizing this first volume, not even summarizing the whole thing, I would just say, starts with a guy remembering his childhood, remembering his house in a place called Combray, cuts to him having a cup of tea and then realizing that he wasn't actually remembering Combray, he was just remembering a vague set that consisted or was built of his house, the stairwell leading to his room, his parents, and just some surroundings. But having this cup of tea just ignites his memory and makes him start thinking about the whole rest of the town. And so we then get a big survey of Combray. We then have a hard cut to the love story of a man named Swann and a woman named Odette, which I didn't realize this, but apparently that's a kind of joke on, or I think the names are referencing Swan Lake or something like that. And then at the very end, we have a jump back to our tea-sipping main character, who I don't think we learn his name in this book, but we jump back to that main character and his developing affection for a character named Gilberta, and so on. And that's it. That's all that this 450 pages is in terms of plot, but, it's not about the plot, it's about how it's written. And in terms of how it's written, these tags that I have on the side, a lot of the time the tags are referencing certain sentences or referencing, just like clumps of text. A lot of these tags are just representing, for me, unbroken pages or paragraphs that I need to go back and read, because just the way that Proust operates and moves through the world, it was really like reading the Notebooks of Multilores Brigger, but on steroids. The main character in the book is effectively just doing this. just looking around and seeing things. He's just making observations that are so penetrating and so perfectly fleshed out for all of these characters, and really trying to give every character sort of the time that is required to explain why they're acting in this sort of way, the movements and the gestures, and like, it's God tier. It's like God tier writing. I can't believe how good it is, and I'm like this close to impulse buying all of the rest of them, but like that is gonna just destroy my reading schedule. But I know that I'm gonna have to read the complete thing within like the next 2 or 3 years. I just want to start reading some extracts, because I at some point, it's not like I can talk more about the plot, but I just need to give you some sort of taste, so that hopefully I can also do my part in convincing anyone who's not read Proust yet to pick it up and try and read it. This collection, by the way, is translated by Lydia Davis, who I've not read any of her works, but I do have her short story collection, so I'm keen to read that. But I figured I would mention it because I know that this Penguin Modern Classics series differs from the more popular one. I think it's Moncrief. Is that the name of the man who like famously translated it? But this edition, all of the books in the series are translated by a different person, which is really interesting to me, and I'm curious to see what that's like. And then if I read it again, I'll read a different translation just to see what it's like. But let me give you an example. This is from early on. This is page 8. Sometimes, as Eve was born from one of Adam's ribs, a woman was born during my sleep from a cramped position of my thigh. Formed of the pleasure I was on the point of enjoying, she, I imagined, was the one offering it to me. My body, which felt in hers my own warmth, tried to return to itself inside her. I woke up. The rest of humanity seemed very remote compared with this woman I had left scarcely a few moments before, my cheeks still warm from her kiss, my body aching from the weight of hers. If, as sometimes happened, she had the features of a woman I had known in life, I would devote myself entirely to this end, to finding her, like those who go off journeying to see a longed-for city with their own eyes, and imagine that one can enjoy in reality the charm of a dream. Little by little, the memory of her would fade. I had forgotten the girl of my dream. And I can so see what people are talking about when they say that, yes, Proust is a novelist, but really he is also a philosopher, and he's just trying to kind of channel all of his thoughts and perspectives on the world into his work. But even with respect to the most insignificant things in life, none of us constitutes a material whole, identical for everyone, which a person has only to go and look up as though we were a book of specifications or a last testament. Our social personality is a creation of the minds of others. Even the very simple act that we call seeing a person we know is in part an intellectual act. We fill the physical appearance of the individual we see with all the notions we have about him, and in the total picture that we form for ourselves, these notions certainly have the greater part. In the end, they swell his cheeks so perfectly, follow the line of his nose in an adherence so exact, they do so well at nuancing the sonority of his voice, as though the latter were only a transparent envelope, that each time we see his face and hear this voice, it is these notions that we encounter, that we hear. So Swann is an art collector, and this is the narrator talking about frescoes. But later I understood that the startling strangeness, the special beauty of these frescoes was due to a large place which the symbol occupied in them, and the fact that it was represented not as a symbol, since the thought symbolized was not expressed, but as real, as actually experienced or physically handled, gave something more literal or more precise to the meaning of the work, something more concrete and more striking to the lesson it taught. In the case of the poor kitchen maid, too, wasn't one's attention constantly brought back to her belly by the weight that pulled on it? And in the same way, also, the thoughts of dying are often turned towards the aspect of death that is real, painful, dark, visceral, towards the underside of death, which is in fact the side it presents to them and so harshly makes them feel, and which more closely resembles a crushing burden, a difficulty breathing, a need to drink, than what we call the idea of death. This is such a crazy one that I just have to read in total. Talking about the character getting into writing. The character. Later still, when I began writing a book and the quality of certain sentences was not high enough to convince me to continue it, I would find their equivalent in Bergot, which is an author the narrator has been reading and has been infatuated by. But it was only then, when I read them in his book, that I could enjoy them. When I was the one composing them, anxious that they should reflect exactly what I perceived in my thoughts, afraid that I would not make a good likeness, I hardly had time to ask myself whether what I was writing was agreeable. But in fact, there was no other sort of sentence, no other sort of idea that I really loved. My uneasy and dissatisfied efforts were themselves a sign of love, a love without pleasure but profound. And so, when I suddenly found sentences like these in a book by another person, that is, without having to suffer my usual qualms, my usual severity, without having to torment myself, I would at last abandon myself with delight to my partiality for them, like a cook who, when for once he does not have to cook, at last finds time to be a glutton. It seemed to me suddenly that my humble life and the realms of the truth were not as widely separated as I had thought, that even they coincided at certain points, and from confidence and joy I wept over the writer's pages as though in the arms of a father I had found again. One of the things, this is in the section Swann in Love, one of the things that ties Swann and Odette together is a melody that was composed by a composer that was sort of in the circle and that they knew about, and this is what the narrator writes about it. It even seemed for a moment that this love for a phrase of music would have to open in Swann the possibility of a sort of rejuvenation. He had for so long given up directing his life towards an ideal goal and limited it to the pursuit of everyday satisfactions that he believed, without ever saying so formally to himself, that this would not change as long as he lived. Much worse, since his mind no longer entertained any lofty ideas, he had ceased to believe in their reality, though without being able to deny it altogether. Thus, he had acquired the habit of taking refuge in unimportant things that allowed him to ignore the fundamental essence of things. Now, like certain confirmed invalids in whom suddenly a country they have arrived in, a different diet, sometimes a spontaneous, mysterious organic development, seem to bring on such a regression of their ailment that they begin to envisage the unhoped-for possibility of belatedly starting a completely different life, Swann found within himself, in the recollection of a phrase he had heard in certain sonatas he asked people to play for him, to see if he would not discover it in them, the presence of one of those invisible realities in which he had ceased to believe, and to which, as if the music had had a sort of sympathetic influence on the moral dryness from which he suffered, he felt in himself once again the desire and almost the strength to devote his life. And this book is filled with that. Like every single paragraph is that in this book. It is just I can't believe it. I can't believe how good this work is. Yeah. Honestly, that's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to talk about for Proust. I could keep going. I could almost just read the whole thing top to bottom, and I would feel like that was a worthy use of your time. But yeah, I mean, I know I'm going to have to read at least one more of the books. I'm probably going to read, I think the next one's called Within a Budding Grove or something like that. Not Within a Bamboo Grove. That's an entirely different story, I imagine. But yeah, thanks again for everybody recommending and just like for the abundance of Proust content that has like made me want to buy it and then make me want to actually pick it up and prioritize it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you take my recommendation as well to heart, and if you haven't already, to pick up and start your journey reading Proust. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next video.